Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
One Pod Vader.
That's football.
Every angle of the NFL covered.
All that kind of stuff, I get it.
This,
no question about it,
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
And it is time for a Royal Rumble. The 12-1 Kansas City Chiefs face off against the 10-3 New Orleans Saints. I am Nick, your Kansas City Chiefs superfan. I am joined by my interconference similar juggernaut in Chris, our Saints superfan. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing wonderful, Nick. How you been? How are you doing? I'm
doing very well. As this may be somewhat apparent to listeners due to my delivery of the opener there, I am tucking into a little bit of a High West double rye based on some nice news I got today, and I'm excited for this game. This is actually, what's interesting about this game is that this is it's going to be a matchup between, I think, two of the easily the top 5 teams in this league. But because it's an interconference game, everyone's looking at the playoff scenarios here. For the Chiefs, now that the Steelers have lost 2 straight, and the Chiefs only have 1 loss on their own ledger, they can actually afford to lose either this game or the Falcons game and still be a sole owner of the first seed. But as the scenarios start stacking up on the NFC side, for the Saints, at a half a game back, I believe, behind the Green Bay Packers, this does have some real meaning for New Orleans. Is that right?
Absolutely. Turns out losing to a bad Philadelphia Eagles team kind of affects you a little bit within the playoff standings. So it's going to be a big deal. We assume Drew Brees will be the quarterback when the playoffs start. The Saints have thankfully locked up that playoff position last week. So we assume it's going to be Brees. And with his age, lack of healthy ribs and one lung, you would assume you want those games to be indoors. So it's important not to play Green Bay in Lambeau. The Saints really need to win out and hope for a little bit of luck with Green Bay the rest of the way.
Interesting. And just going straight to that quarterback question, I think that's another big topic for just understanding how this game is going to go and all of that. What is your understanding of what the pecking order is going to be? Maybe do they trot Brees out a little early for this game, given the stakes, and who is still the first man up? Is it still, are they going to maybe give Jameis a shot, given some of the struggles of the last couple of weeks? What do you think?
I don't know. Obviously that's the that's the hardest question for anyone to answer. If Brees can play, he will. And if he should or shouldn't, I think is a different conversation. I know for one, I'd rather him sit. We've discussed how important the playoff seeding is, but having him completely healthy and ready to go is more important. I would take Drew Brees healthy in Lambeau as opposed to whichever Taysom Hill we're going to get this week, which might be where we're at. So it's a really tough call to make. I don't think Jameis, there's a lot of consideration for that. I think it's going to be either Taysom or Brees. I just don't see how you make that switch now. If you were going to make that switch, you would have made it after the Denver game, which was pretty bad. But they didn't. They went back to Hill against Atlanta. He looked really good against Atlanta. He played very well against Atlanta both times. And then the whole team played poorly against Philadelphia. He was a big part of that. But this is a guy with a 3-1 record. I understand the Denver game is what it is when they played a practice squad wide receiver at quarterback. But you don't make that change now. You let him ride it out. You get Brees healthy. Let Brees get some games under his belt the last 2 weeks against lesser competition, and then you go from there.
All of that is interesting to me because if this is a Taysom Hill game, you look at the scenario where He did a lot of damage against the Falcons, who don't have a great pass rush, and the Chiefs pass rush has talent there, but actually has been kind of disappointing low key this year. With Frank Clark, I think only has 4 or 5 sacks and probably is going to finish with 6 or 7, which is far below what he produced in the last couple of years. Chris Jones can still wreck it in the middle, but for whatever reason they haven't been getting there. I do think part of that is that teams have been switching to quick passes and just kind of taking what's there with the secondary, which the Chiefs secondary has a lot of talent holes, but I think and their linebackers tend to struggle in man coverage, and so there's kind of easy short passes there that they just slowly have to abandon, depending upon what the point differential is. But I think it sets up for a really interesting matchup with Taysom Hill, who I think, while he's shown some promise, as we were talking about on the Slack earlier today, one of the big things with him is then he's been a little slow to process things still. And so maybe that does leave that a situation where you can't necessarily do a super quick, Tom Brady pass game, and maybe the Chiefs pass rush is going to be able to get to him.
Well, that's one of the biggest aspects to this. Is it's not just Drew Brees versus Taysom Hill. It's that the offense is completely different when either one of these guys are in the game. You don't see a short game with Taysom Hill, which has been the Saints' bread and butter for years. Getting the quick slants to Michael Thomas, the quick outs to Alvin Kamara, getting him out of the backfield. Alvin Kamara has been invisible in the passing game since Taysom Hill's taken over. And it's because they're running a lot of plays downfield, but you can't really run with Brees. So I do expect, the Saints have been very secretive on every injury all season. I expect it to continue this way. And as the Kansas City Chiefs go, I don't know how you game plan for it. Because if you game plan for Hill and Brees comes in, they're going to nickel and dime you all day. But if it's Hill, you're going to have to play your corners back a little bit. You're going to expect what is normally a attacking offense that goes 5 to 7 yards. With Hill, it's been 15 to 20. So it's interesting. It's very interesting to see how Kansas City approaches this, and frankly, just who the hell's playing quarterback.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, in a way, I feel like almost the Chiefs are somewhat ready for that, just in that's almost felt like kind of the norm for them this year, just because this year has felt different in terms of the way that teams have prepared for the Chiefs, and that, now there's a couple of years of Mahomes on tape, and teams know that their only shot is to throw the kitchen sink defensively at them offensively and do weird stuff on offense, and like just throw out their own playbook and don't do anything they put on tape, and just do weird stuff and try to put as many points as you can on the board and confuse both sides of the ball for the Chiefs in the first half, and just then hope that that's enough to win. And it's led to now, I mean, the Chiefs have basically, the last 5 games were all 1-score games, because teams have game planned really well against them. The Chiefs have stumbled offensively due to defensive game plan stuff, and also just mistakes and maybe some lethargy. But then also, their defense can get picked on at times, but they tend to adjust really well. And it's just, it's one of those weird things that it becomes sort of the regular rhythm of a game where the Chiefs are down by multiple scores in the first half, and maybe have made a ton of mistakes, as last year, where, last week, where Mahomes had 2 interceptions on the season, then threw 3 against the Dolphins in the first half. Granted, a couple of those were tip balls, but one was a really great defensive play. But nonetheless, it's like every now and then, like, everything can go wrong for the Chiefs, but there's just always this moment where they figure it all out all at once, and in the spans of 2 to 3 game minutes, they've put 21 points on the board and flipped a 10-point deficit to like an 11-point lead. And And then none of the opponent's game plans really work anymore. They have to then switch to something else because you're playing now trailing football rather than leading football and all of that. And I think it's just going to be fascinating because the Saints have the weapons and the defensive talent to really challenge the Chiefs on both levels. And it's just a matter of, can you come up with a plan that can sustain itself through the course of a game, or do you have a plan B that can equally work? And the fact that we don't even know who's going to be playing quarterback necessarily for the Saints makes that so much more intriguing.
No, it absolutely does. And one of the things that terrify me, at least as a Saints fan, is the Saints defense has been playing great. They took a week off against Philadelphia. There's a lot of talk about, is Taysom the guy in New Orleans because of the Philadelphia game? He was bad. The entire team looked like they didn't want to be there. And that's not something they're going to be able to do against Kansas City. The Saints do typically pick themselves up against better talent. With all that being said, the Saints' strength has been their secondary and their ability to disguise the coverage. The Saints have moved guys from corner to safety, from safety to corner. They've become interchangeable to help with to help with that. With someone like Patrick Mahomes, it doesn't seem to matter. Things can go poorly for him all game, but eventually Tyreek Hill is just going to be faster. Mahomes is just going to throw it deep enough. So the Saints have to be able to avoid all mistakes because they're not going to be able to confuse him all game. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. That's my biggest concern with this.
Yeah, I do think that's kind of the thing with the Chiefs is that the Chiefs can be confused and can be stymied because ultimately they are still a finesse offense. They're very much so a finesse offense. They're kind of like the Peyton Manning Colts in that if you play physical with them and get everybody off their routes and the timing's all screwed up, you can really screw with the Chiefs offense for a period of time. But once they figure out, inevitably, any single defensive approach to the Chiefs is going to present some sort of a weakness that they can exploit, and they have just weapons galore to do it. And once they figure that out, they are going to throw points on the board, and it's just a question of can you build enough of a lead and keep going on offense to match that. And it's been just sort of wild to watch these Chiefs games because I do think the Chiefs are getting every coaching staff's best effort. And it makes it really interesting. And thankfully now, because like Andy Reid's always been, an amazingly creative play caller on the offensive side of the ball. Their former defensive coordinator, Bob Sutton, was pretty intransigent and pretty just believing in his system. Whereas Spagnuolo, I think his best trait is just being kind of all over the place in the way that he'll approach things, but he'll adjust and he'll be super aggressive at times. He'll back off at times, and he's willing to just go with whatever's there. And the few pieces that are very talented on the defense can make the plays that make it work late in games. And I think this is very much a game that could follow that same pattern in that we'll have multiple lead changes regardless of who the quarterback is. And I think also you mentioned that Kamara has been a little absent. Well, I would say the largest weakness of this Chiefs defense is speed at linebacker. And so this may be a game where, regardless of whatever Taysom Hill's preferences are, they really hammer home the ways in which they can use Kamara to their advantage.
Well, that's the surprising part about it is it's Kamara's usage. You're not seeing a lot of routes out of the backfield with him. They're lining him more up at wide receiver, or they're leading him in the block. So we did see an attempt at a screenplay last week where Hill tried to gun in a screen pass and it bounced off Kamara's helmet and went for a pick. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that one. But yeah, it's the play calling. Sean Payton has completely, I think, gotten away with some of the things that have worked for the Saints offense to cater to Taysom Hill. And that kind of brings back to how do you game plan? Because I agree with you. I think one of the best things the Saints can do this game is quick pass to Thomas, quick pass to Kamara, and just drive down the field. You haven't seen that for 5 weeks. So does that come back? I want to see Kamara back. Kamara was, I think, legitimately an MVP candidate for the first half of the season. they could get that back. He's healthy. So, yeah, everything comes back down to that one, who's playing this game. Is it Breeze or Hill?
Interesting. Well, you mentioned that, Kamara might have been an MVP candidate. And then I can't get away from without mentioning his name, and I think it just makes sense to lead us into X factors. And although he's an obvious one, I'm just going to say Travis Kelce because I want to talk about him. He currently leads the league in receiving yards, and with 3 games to go, if he continues that, he would be the first tight end to lead the league in the receiving yards on a season. It's his 5th straight 1,000+ yard season, all that kind of stuff. I do think finally the talk is starting to catch up to him as being, maybe surpassing Gronk in the conversation as the GOAT if he can keep this up for even just a couple more seasons. And he is still the engine of the Chiefs offense as much as the Tyreek plays end up on SportsCenter. It really is basically Kelce is the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. And so I'm just going to throw him out of the Zach factor just because I wanted to throw out his fun stats. But you mentioned, Kamara, and maybe that strategy shift is going to make him one, but do you have another X factor, or is he who you think is what's going to pivot the outcome of this game on?
No. Actually, I think one of the big things the Saints have to do is counter Travis Kelce. And so for me, it's going to be Demario Davis and Quan Alexander. Since Quan Alexander got traded from San Francisco, he has completely transformed this defense. It's allowed Demario Davis to play a little more free. You have 2 insanely athletic, fast linebackers now in the Saints base nickel. I don't know if that's enough to stop Kelce, but I think it's going to give Kelce his biggest challenge yet. I see a lot of zone help with those 2 and a man coverage from Malcolm Jenkins, which is what they've done a lot of this season. And so it's going to put a lot of pressure on your Tyreek Hills and, Michael Hardman's, players of that nature.
Good stuff. Well, it is now brings us to prediction time. I think I still think this is going to be a close game. And, regardless of the kind of path it takes, I think, and even with Taysom Hill at quarterback, I just think these are just 2 really well coached teams that have a lot of talent in key areas that can throw a lot at each other. And so I think we're probably going to see a lot of lead changes in this game and it swing back and forth a bit. I do think the Chiefs ultimately win this one. I'm going to say 35-31.
Yeah, I'm going to say 35-24. I'm actually going to go with the Chiefs on this one.
Boom!
Yeah. I'm not really part of the show much anymore, so I can't say everybody knows me, but I've been the biggest Taysom Hill supporter from the beginning. And I still feel like he has the ability to be the starting quarterback next year. And a lot of these things that we've seen the past few weeks that have been ugly can get better with time. We are talking about a 30-year-old who's spent the past 5 years playing tight end. I'm not going to completely kill him for 2 out of 4 bad games. But I think that the Saints defense is going to have a hard time with Kansas City. The Saints have had the luxury of playing some really bad teams recently and beating up on them a little bit. Kind of got punched in the mouth a bit by Philadelphia, but I kind of fear I fear that deep ball. I fear the Taysom Hill at quarterback not knowing how to play from behind and the wheels just kind of falling off a little bit. So, unfortunately, that's my prediction. I'm desperately hope I'm wrong, but where I'm at.
We will see. The Chiefs seem to find new ways to make it interesting for opponents every week. So, it could end up closer than you think. But yeah, I think this Chiefs team, as much as I have derided the pick of CEH in the first round, I don't hate the strategy and just essentially like presenting to opponents like, fine, like if you want to sell out to stop the pass, we'll run it 40 times on you. And if you want to throw all your assets at this, we have another counter for that. And there's just no correct way to defensively play against the Chiefs. And even if you confuse them, then in those gaps and the confusion, they can throw up points. And so it's just tough for teams to deal with. but nonetheless, I mean, I think the way that the way that New Orleans is set up, especially with Breeze coming back for the playoff run, this very well could be a Super Bowl preview. So I'm sure it's going to be a good one way or the other. No,
I absolutely agree, and not only do I want to see the Saints be successful, because this is a potential Super Bowl preview, but to be able to hand it to Steve Spagnuolo, the architect of the worst defense in NFL history when he was in New Orleans, that prick, and then he goes on to be successful somewhere else. No, I'd love to see them smack him around a little bit, but I think that might have to wait till February.
Well, hey, I mean, to be fair, that was the Bounty Gate season. He was kind of handed a bit of a raw situation there, all things considered. It wasn't a great defense that he picked up also.
No, I mean, he definitely walked into a house fire, but then he just started throwing gasoline everywhere. Like, this guy did not help put out that fire at all. So, no, absolutely would like to see him get it handed to him.
Good stuff, man. It's either going to be a Spagnuolo revenge game or a Saints against Spagnuolo revenge game.
He was always the key. We knew that going into this.
Good stuff. Well, thanks, and a pleasure as always, Chris.
Hey, take care, buddy.
Dear friends and colleagues, saying goodbye is never easy. I believe we can all feel proud of what we have done together, and through it all, you have maintained your professionalism and commitment and remained true to the spirit of the Charter. That principle.
We go out, we hit people in the mouth.